Good morning, everybody. And I'm going to start a new series of talks based on a fascicle or a chapter in Dogen's Shobogenzo, which is his well-known work of writings. And this chapter is called 8 Awarenesses of the Enlightened Person. And he based it on some writings that were recorded of the Buddha, which was supposedly his last teaching. And I'm going to list the 8 awarenesses, and I'm going to say a little bit about each one of them today. And then in subsequent weeks, I'm going to take them one by one and elaborate on each one of them. So my suggestion is that as I enumerate them, just reflect on if any one of them has any resonance with you, perks up your interest, one or more, and then maybe afterwards in the discussion you can say something. So the first awareness is having few desires. Doesn't say having no desires, just having few desires. The second one is knowing how to be satisfied. And the third one is enjoying serenity and tranquility. And the fourth one is exerting meticulous effort. Again, it doesn't say exerting great effort, it's just meticulous effort. Fifth one is not forgetting right thought. Sixth is practicing Samadhi. And during Shishin, Mui talked about Samadhi. Some of you might recall. Seventh is cultivating wisdom. And the last one, the eighth, is avoiding idle talk. It's interesting that that's the last one. So regarding having few desires, the question is, what do you lack right now? If you have many desires, you look around a lot and think you'll find satisfaction outside of yourself. If you lack confidence, do you think you will find it by looking outside yourself or by pretending to be confident? So having few desires can mean to bear witness to your perceived inadequacies. Or as Dogen also has said, to study the self, just to see what's going on. And I will add that I'll probably mention this next time when I talk about this, that my teacher said he had lots of desires, actually. And his big one was he desired all of his students to awaken. So the second one is knowing how to be satisfied. I think some of this is from what the Buddha wrote. Those who do not know how to be satisfied are not satisfied even when dwelling in a heavenly place. Those who do not know how to be satisfied are poor even though they are wealthy, while those who know how to be satisfied are wealthy even though they have little. So again, the question comes up, what are you lacking? When we do not know ourselves, we think we're lacking something, and we need that in order to be satisfied. We each have a treasure within, that we can discover through meditation and by bearing witness. Zazen is the royal road to the treasures trapped in our unconscious mind. I think it was during the last session, Roshi Shinko talked about the man who died and went to this realm where he was given everything he wanted. He had all of the best foods, the best wine. He could have as many young women as he desired. He had people waiting on him, serving his every need. Then after a while, he got bored with it, and he said, if this is heaven, I'd rather be in hell. And of course, they said, well, where do you think you are? So, how to be satisfied. And then the third one is enjoying serenity and tranquility. So, the many rivers which flow into the ocean become the one taste of the ocean. When they flow into the pure ocean of the Dharma, there is no distinction as delicacies or plain food. There is just one taste, and it is the Buddha Dharma, the world itself as it is. So also in the last session, Roshi Shinko talked about the mouth of a monk is like an oven. So everything is consumed, whether it's a delicacy or a plain food. If we get excited about delicacies and discouraged about plain food, then we don't enjoy serenity and tranquility. A friend of mine who is now a Zen teacher was talking about his first awakening experience. He's kind of a portly guy, and he enjoys eating. And he was at a Zen retreat, and the main meal of the day was miso soup with a couple of pieces of seaweed in it and a couple of pieces of tofu, then maybe some rice. But he was eating his miso soup, and he kept thinking how hungry he was. And then he thought he had eaten all of the seaweed and all of the tofu, and then he was lamenting the fact that there wasn't any more. And as he drank down his miso soup, there was a little piece of tofu in the bottom. And he looked at it and suddenly he realized that all of it, everything that he had desired was suddenly realized in that one little piece of tofu. And he had this big awareness and awakening experience from one little piece of tofu. So how do we enjoy serenity and tranquility, particularly now in a world that's very turbulent and chaotic and unstable? So I'll come back to each one of these in subsequent weeks. So exerting meticulous effort. So I think the Buddha asked the question, can the water in the valley ever stop and rest? When the water finally reaches the sea, it becomes the great waves. With meticulous effort, you can see through walls. You can fly to the Tushita heaven and descend to the depths of hell and liberate all beings. If you become enchanted by your strength and puff yourself up, You will fall like Icarus, who flew too close to the sun. Through meticulous effort, we develop the courage to trust the rawness of our experience and to accept it for what it is. The essence of courage is being willing to have an open heart, even in situations that are difficult or painful. It involves letting down our protective shields and allowing ourselves to be turned by the Dharma while we simultaneously turn the Dharma. The courage of having an open heart must be contained within our awareness in order to manifest true compassion. So exerting meticulous effort is really looking at ourselves in detail. I think it was my Dharma grandfather, Yasutani Roshi, who said when we first start practicing, it's easy to see the big boulders in our mind that are making our practice difficult, the things that we're holding on to. And then as we're able to get past these boulders, we look at the rocks, and then the pebbles, and then the sand, and then eventually the fine dust. It's the fine dust, that sometimes really prevents us from exerting meticulous effort and from enjoying serenity and tranquility. So meticulous means, it's really being consistent. Being precise doesn't mean, that we have to have the strength of 100 elephants in order to exert effort. Just being very careful and thorough. So the next one is not forgetting right thought. Now, as I've said many times in Zazen, we don't study the content of thought as much as we study the nature of thought. We can see the rising and falling away of thoughts. They're as solid as a wisp of smoke. Yet we become captive to our thoughts. If we think something enough, we begin to believe it. Thoughts have the power to create heaven and hell, even though they have no substance. So what is right thought and what is wrong thought? To study the self is to forget the self. Once someone at the center said, I feel like a fraud. And I remember Roshi Shinko saying, the ego is a fraud. What is it that feels like a fraud? The ego does not want to be exposed because it is afraid that it's like the emperor's new clothes, which are insubstantial. So, yeah, it is insubstantial. The ego, it has no substance. When we abide in non-judgmental pure awareness, where is the fraud? And where is wrong thought? So the next one is practicing samadhi. When the mind's in samadhi, we understand the characteristics of the creation and destruction of the various phenomena in the world. And for this reason, you should constantly practice with diligence and cultivate all kinds of samadhi. When you realize samadhi, the mind is not scattered, just as those who protect themselves from floods guard the levee. For the sake of the water of wisdom, cultivate samadhi well and do not let it leak out. So the key to practice is to develop the samadhi and retain it in all activities. Samadhi itself is a substance of wisdom, and wisdom itself is the functioning of samadhi. I'll say that again. Samadhi is a substance of wisdom, and wisdom is the functioning of samadhi. Of course, that leads into the next one, which is cultivating wisdom. But I mentioned this before too, and oh gosh, how many years ago is it now? I went to a session in 1972, so if I do the math, that's 50 years ago. It's hard to believe. Was with my first teacher, Roshi, and he was a guest teacher. It was at the New York Zen Studies Society, which was run by Edo Shimano. We called him Tai-san. He was a sensei at that time. It was a week-long session, and after the session was over, everybody in the who had been attending the session, I didn't know anybody. I'd just come from out of town. It was in New York, and I was standing by the side with Roshi, who was a guest teacher, like I said. And he didn't speak English very well, in fact, very poorly. And all these people were standing around after session going, this sounded like a hen house. You know, they were all chatting. And Sochiroshi looked at me and he looked at everybody and he went like this. Samadhi, poof, poof, poof. So how do we cultivate samadhi? Well, don't let it leak out. That's what we talk about all the time, you know, when we talk about bringing your practice into your life from your cushion, is to maintain that awareness and concentration in everything that you do. And then that'll reflect back on all of the other 8 awarenesses, you know, such as enjoying serenity and tranquility. So let's look at cultivating wisdom. So when we start a meditation practice, we start a vertical journey into the depths of the mind and begin to experience that there is much more to the mind, a whole new and infinite dimension that's beyond reason and intellectual understanding. And when we let go of our attachment to our narrow, limited notion of self, we can experience a new, healthier version of who we are. This new version is not limited by fear, guilt, or hatred. This new sense of self is not bounded by conventional notions of space and time. nor is it limited by conventional knowledge and understanding. This wisdom is a functioning of samadhi. And the functioning of this wisdom is compassion. And true compassion is the unconditional acceptance of ourselves and others. So we say wisdom is seeing clearly into the nature of things. And what is that? Everything is as it is. What is? That's what some people see as the nature of God, actually, is everything as it is, as isness. So the last one is avoiding idle talk. And the Buddha said, to totally know the true form of all things is the same thing as being without idle talk. So at the beginning of Shishin, we have the precautions. And one of them is, to maintain noble silence, which is kind of like avoiding idle talk. Sometimes we have to give direction or instructions or clarification. But what is idle talk? So I leave that as an exercise. And then we say not to look around, which is the same as having few desires. So all of the precautions to our practice are contained here in these 8 awarenesses. So generally speaking, we're afraid of those things that we don't know, where we don't understand. And because we don't understand our mind, and it's like a darkened house, we might become a little apprehensive. But meditation can provide a torch to help us explore this house. And with a torch, the terrifying shadows start to disperse, and the mind's inherent treasures will start to shine. So, as we chant at the evening Gatha, take heed. Don't squander your life. Don't hesitate. So that's what our practice is, to know the treasure of your own mind. And that's what these 8 awarenesses are, to help us reveal that treasure.